Hey review family, keep it tight. My name is Jay Morse, Review Guy, and I'm back again to bring you another video. And in this one I'm going to be covering the brand new Tim Hecker album entitled Anoyo? Anoyo? We'll go with Anoyo. So Tim Hecker, you will probably know who he is by clicking on this video, but if you don't, he is a Canadian electronic music producer that has been around since pretty much the 90s, the late 90s, but he started coming into prominence in the early 2000s, and then in the 2010s released some really important albums for his discography. His previous album, Konoyo, saw him venturing into more Japanese gagaku sounds, where he actually worked with a gagaku ensemble, and if you don't know what that is, it is a Japanese classical kind of sound. Tokyo Gakuso was the one that helped with this album, and it really did give it this orchestral feel, and it wasn't like a Japanese band that was doing something that sounded similar to what Tim was doing. No, this was a very Japanese-inspired album from front to back. His 2013 album, Virgins, was one of the most dystopian and apocalyptic albums that you are going to hear in this decade from the electronic field. It is very droney, it's very ambient inspired, and that's the one thing that sets Tim apart from a lot of other electronic producers that stick into like the house field or just the dance field or the EDM, the IDM field, something similar to like an IDM like Apparat. I enjoyed his album this year. Tim really does experiment with the electronic genre as a whole. He pushes it out of its comfort zone. He does things that are a little bit unorthodox. He mixes in these ambient pieces, these drone pieces, these Japanese pieces, and it all comes together to create these very either heavenly or just dystopian, hellish type of soundscapes overall. Finds himself once again going a little bit into that gakuko territory with a lot of the soundscapes on Anoyo, which is only 6 tracks, 34 minutes, which by the standards of his previous 3 albums, which all breached the 40-minute mark, the 45-minute mark, it's kind of a bold statement. But honestly, I don't think it's anything to worry about, because this is a really nice electronic ambient album. I will, however, say that a lot of the noisy and droney elements that carried a lot of his previous projects do not really carry over on this album entirely. There are some layered synth passages across this whole album that can get a little ferocious and can get a little bit ear-piercing, but at the same time, they're all layered and coated in this nice kind of pretty sheen that makes them sound more ambient inspired than, say, a drone or a noise inspired. And while it can drone on a little bit, and the same synth passages can layer and come on each other and just kind of go over and over and over alongside other embellishments in the instrumental palette, to be honest, I don't think this can really be labeled as a noise album, a drone album. I don't think it's that. I think it's more of an ambient album, if not an IDM album. Like, the first minute and a half to 2 minutes of the opening track, That World, presents such a, like, Japanese-inspired feel. That gakuko feel really does come back in spades, but the whole track does have a little bit of that droniness that is on his previous albums, but it's just not as noisy. It's so much more ambient. It feels like something that maybe a Vangelis would have done. This track's almost 10 minutes long, and it does go on a while. The layered synths, as well as when they're bouncing from ear to ear or when they're rolling from ear to ear, one maybe being a couple seconds delayed or a couple seconds ahead of another, making it sound very kind of like chaotic but measured. Like, I know that's contradicting, but it's chaotic but measured. There's a method to its madness. And I just want to say something that no one's gonna get in this video, and I'm sorry I'm ranting about this, but I swear to God, these background synths that will appear and go in and out of the mix on this first track reminds me so much of something off of Final Fantasy IV's Underworld soundtrack. Something, anyone that's played that game will know what I mean, but like the underworld, the underbelly part, specifically the Sylph Cave, I believe it was called. This one synth passage sounds so much like it. I'm sorry, that's one of my favorite games. I'm just geeking out a little bit. Is But a Simulated Blur is an amazing follow-up, although it does take on a completely different feel in my opinion. This track almost feels like a dark ambient epic piece, and the rolling percussion from that gagaku instrumentation makes it sound like something that's swelling up like the Jaws soundtrack. Boom, 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 boom. But the same synth line that carries on throughout the whole track begins with the track, but the percussion that also sits head to head with it, it makes this type of contrast to it, where one side is this beautiful, heavenly, drifty type of droning synth melody that carries on, but then you get this percussion and the gagaku instrumentation, and it all comes together to make a really nice sounding track. Step away from Konoyo, which that was his previous album's name, Konoyo. This might be the runt of the litter in my personal opinion. This track, in my opinion, is not really as bold as any of the other tracks on the album. It's much more kind of bass level. It's only 4 minutes and 38 seconds, so it's not that long, and it doesn't really carry on a lot of that same experimental feel that the other tracks on the album does. It feels like a very straightforward, a very right to the punch, no BS type of ambient sound piece. There's no chaos, no noise, no droning, no gagaku instrumentation on it, in my opinion, and to be honest, I don't hate it, but it probably is one of the weaker moments on the album entirely, because a lot of times I really needed to just take a step back and say, I'm needing to not expect much from this track. I need to take this at face value as an ambient track and not as a drone piece or a noise piece or a gagaku piece. Track number 4 and 5, Into the Void and Not Alone, are pretty logical follow-ups to the first two tracks, and they bring back that gagaku instrumentation. They're very ambient oriented. They don't have much of that drony quality except for when they layer some of those synths together. And that's the one thing about this album, is after you hear those first two tracks, which are so good by the standards of what this album's doing, the tracks 4 and 5 can kind of feel a little bit underwhelming because he's set the bar so high with what he's able to do with its instrumentation, but it's by no means bad. I mean, who the hell else is doing something that's sounding like this in electronic music, mainstream electronic music, IDM or EDM? I mean, look at people like Gesaffelstein, or what are really they doing to expand the genre in a way that Tim Hecker has in his entire discography, let alone on this album? So you kind of got to appreciate that. You Never Were is 8 minutes and 38 seconds. It ends the album off on a very high note. The synths can have these freak out moments where it'll feel a bit glitchy and distorted, and it'll pop in over the main synth line that carries on. The gagaku instrumentation is obviously here with that percussion and the guitar playing. Actually, it's not a guitar. I'm not 100% sure what that specific instrument is called, but I know it is a traditional Japanese plucked instrument, string instrument, and I would know the name if I saw it, but I couldn't find the name of it, but it is a plucked string instrument from the Japanese tradition. Around the 4 and 5 minute mark, these glitchy, noisy parts that come in over the main synth line are the only parts of the album that can feel kind of noisy and like abrasive. So if that's what you're looking for, definitely listen to this track if that's what you expect from Tim Hecker. Overall, it's a great way to end the album off, and at the end of the track, I like how it fades away and the synth can sound like a low-plucked guitar chord, just a down-tuned guitar chord, and it drifts away into oblivion. Also, I want to read these song titles. That's something I kind of forgot to say. It's That World is But a Simulated Blur, Step Away from Konoyo, Into the Void, Not Alone, You Never Were. And you know, when that's put into perspective, it's kind of hard to deny that this album doesn't have a theme. A lot of instrumental music doesn't have to have vocals to tell a story, and a lot of times it can even do it more. It can invoke a lot more emotion. I mean, as a progressive rock and metal fan, the band Chon really is a good example of that, how they have that psychedelic and nice quality to them. And Tim Hecker tells a story. This is a hell of an album, and it's very experimental, but to be honest, I wish that some of the tracks built on the stepping stones of this gagaku instrumentation a little bit more, and it's hard for me to really say that it's as groundbreaking as it would have been if Konoyo wouldn't have been made, because even though that album didn't really blow me away or anything, I still feel like with the Japanese instrumentation that popped up on that album, it might have diminished the quality and diminished the straight to the punch, just like, oh my gosh, this is a really nice experimental album that this album could encompass, if that makes sense. But still, I love the synth passage passages, I love the melodies, I love the harmonies, I love the gagaku instrumentation. I think that this is a emotional, physical album that you are going to feel in your bones as you're listening to it. It's easy to drift to, it's easy to daydream to, and I like it a lot. So I'm gonna be slapping this with a 7 out of 10. And that is a wrap. Please stay for the end screen. I'll link some videos that you might be interested in. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. If you're new to it, it helps me out a lot. Like this video if you enjoyed, and smash that notification bell to be notified of my future uploads. And I'll talk to you guys next time. But until then, you know who it is. It's Jay Morris, the Review Guy, and I'm signing off saying farewell.